today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present this idea of pre-registration. So as it has been said, the idea that it is interactive, so do not hesitate to interrupt me and ask questions or make comments. There is like several points, like several questions that I have and that I think can be interesting to discuss. But do not hesitate at any point to ask questions or participate. So the first thing I wanted to start with the definition of pre-registration, which may not be necessarily super clear for everybody. So basically, pre-registrations are online documents that are written before conducting a study and that detail the key features of study design. So there are several points in this definition that are important. So the very key element here is the idea that it's a document that is written before doing this actual study. So compared to like classical research summaries, research reports, articles, here you are doing the work of writing before actually conducting the study. The other thing that are important is the idea of like online documents. So the fact that it is online is convenient. The main goal here is that it allows to have a timestamp on your document saying like proving that you have written it before actually conducting the study. And what is important that at this stage, it doesn't necessarily have to be completely open. So what is important that this online document should be accessible during reviewing processes and after the publication of your work, but you do not necessarily have to make it public from the very beginning. So this is crucial because like you may do not want to like disclose all your research hypotheses beforehand and like be reassured like the fact that it is online allows you to have a timestamp independently of whether it is public or not. The other thing that is important is this idea of key feature that can be a little bit ambiguous and vague, and actually this reflects the fact that there is some flexibility in the pre-registrations and there is no necessarily very standardized formats. So there are different, nonetheless, features that seems to be recurrent in pre-registrations. So it normally minimally includes the research question and the hypothesis, the sample. So it can be like either participant sample for research conducted on human beings. It can be also like materials if you're analyzing different type of materials. The design of your study. So what are you going to do practically? So for experiment, and this is what I do, like it's really explaining like the experiment protocol. And the analysis plan, so it can include quality checks. Well, it should include normally quality checks. So defining what will give you cues that your study went as expected and what can give you cue that actually there were issues. And another thing that is important is this idea of exclusion criteria. So the fact that you may be willing at some point of your study to exclude some of your part of your sample for some reason. So for like what I do is experiment on human participants, and sometimes we have outliers like people responding super fast or like super slowly. That suggests that they actually did not complete the task as the other participant did, and so like they are not comparable in this way. So they may be not attentive, or they may have been doing something else during the experiment. So we want to exclude this participant from our sample, and we're going to use exclusion criteria. And the idea here with the pre-registration is to define the exclusion criteria before actually collecting the data. So basically, this is the minimal information that are usually included in pre-registration, and depending on the websites or on the type of document, so there are websites really helping you filling different cases with like first is research question, second is sample, and so on. Or you can also have a more like document, like personal document, in which you include these informations. So what is important is, at this stage, it can be really adapted to your type of study. So it has been notably done for experiment on human participants. So there is like really standard formats here, but actually depending on what kind of object you are studying, you can really adapt this for fitting your own area. So there are main goals of pre-registration. The first one is the idea of like transparency and commitment. So really, pre-registration were presented as one of the solutions to the replication crisis. So from where I come in psychology, there was this big replication crisis 15 years ago. And the idea was, how can we like increase the reliability and the replicability of our findings? And pre-registration were presented as one of the key tools allowing to like increase replicability. So basically, linked with this goal, you can actually see advantages of the different elements that you should include. For instance, like having the disclosure of your research question and hypothesis, avoid post-hoc a priori hypothesis. So this is like some kind of oxymoron presentation of things, but basically what have been identified in labs as a big problem of misconduct, but even like for researchers who were not necessarily super aware of the fact that it was actual misconduct, is the fact that people define their hypothesis after getting their results. So here, with pre-registration, you cannot do this because you have your hypothesis defined before collecting the data. It also avoids changing and increasing the sample size until you find a significant result. So here in psychology, something that was like very current practice. So people get a like almost significant result, like a p-value of 0.6 with their sample size, the sample size that they initially define, and decide to add 10 participants in order to get a significant result. And here again, it was not seen as a misconduct. It was like actually done in labs. And so here, well, it is not something that you should do for statistical reasons. And the pre-registration was a way to like guarantee that people do not do this anymore. The design thing, it allows to avoid like omitting key variables or key protocol features in the reporting. So saying like, okay, I did not analyze this, so I'm not going to report this in the final article or final report, while actually it may have influenced the results and may have an impact on the behavior of the participants in the experiment, and thus can have an influence on the replicability of the findings. And it also avoids defining your analysis just to get a significant result. And here again, it's a like really usual mispractice that's seen in labs. So like adding a control variable, saying yes, but maybe age is important. And when you add age, well, your critical factor now is significant. And actually, like from a statistical perspective, it's not something that you should do. Like you should include age if you think that a priori it has an importance, and you should not like select your control variables in order to get a significant result. So here again, something that people may be not necessarily aware of the importance and the impact of their practice that is prevented using pre-registration. And same for exclusion criteria. Like you can see in your participant sample that just adding or excluding one participant can actually change all the results. And well, you need to have reasons for like excluding or adding this participant. And it is much, much better when these reasons were defined a priori. So here is the first goal of pre-registration, and the idea that it actually can help the scientific community. the second goal, it can actually improve research design. So like it has some individual benefits for researchers, because it can help them to think about every steps of their study, and so thereby design better studies. So here again, we can take up different criteria, and sorry for the typo, but it can help to clearly define your hypothesis, to identify the relevant sample and sample size. Like it incentivize researchers to perform power analysis, or to look at in the literature for defining the expected effect size and so on, and which are things that are not necessarily usually done in certain disciplines, and including in psychology. Some years ago, it was not something that people engaged in regularly. Same for the design. It helps you design the study and avoid the inclusion of non-theoretically grounded variables. So basically it tells you, okay, writing the design beforehand can help you think, okay, what are the variables that are actually necessary? And because writing is costly, you're going to limit the number of variables that you want to include in this writing process, and that makes you think a little bit more about your experiment design. It can help to identify the relevant variable and the tests that are necessary, and thereby tuning the design of your experiment accordingly. So for instance, you can identify that one type of statistical analysis may be more relevant or more appropriate for testing your hypothesis than another, but requires more statistical power, and that it can like give you cues for like changing a little bit your experiment design in order to get more statistical power. So here again, it's something that is interesting, and also it can help you thinking about what you expect in terms of behavior of your participants in your study, and how you can limit outliers too. So you can add attention checks or like reminders to participants when you see cue that their attention is fading a little bit. So this is for psychology, but it can help you also to safeguard a little bit for getting the most of your sample. So it helps researchers. We had these two goals, and basically this is my first set of questions. The question that arise regularly when we talk about preregistration, the question of whether it's too heavy. So basically it asks you to write a document in which you give all these details. So we see that it can have some benefits, but it's still like something a little bit heavy when you are willing to start a study, especially when you have students and they need to have results rapidly for their report. And the second study, the question which is linked, is whether it's a waste of time. So there is two visions here. Some people think that, well, preregistration is just a waste of time, and you can think of all these different elements without having to write a document. Some others argue that actually it's a good practice, and it's not a waste of time, because at some points you will have to write down these different elements, and so they will be already written and you can use it directly in your paper. For having done several preregistration, I have to say that I never really transferred directly the method from a preregistration document to a research article. There is always some rewriting process, so I'm not super sure that it's actually a gain of time. And the other question that we can ask is whether these two goals can be achieved differently or can be reached differently, and how can we define these key features that are necessary for preregistration. I listed those that are regularly included, but maybe there are other things that should be included in the preregistrations. And another question, maybe more theoretical, is whether it is possible to think of all the features for a new study. So when you think of a new, when you're starting a new study, can you actually think of all the features that are going to be important and all the criteria? And this like basically are questions, like open questions. If you have any comments on these points. Or I can also, like, we can also keep this in mind and I can continue the presentation. If you're not inspired right now. Okay, I'm going to continue. So, well, these are basically the main questions that we can ask at this stage. One solution to this, well, one answer to some of this question is the fact that actually pre-registrations can take different formats. So this is a minimal format. You can also add an introduction, and you can also add like really a clear section explaining your expected results. So minimally, you say like, I'm going to analyze this that way, and my hypothesis will be confirmed if I find this, and you can really have otherwise a very detailed section explaining the expected results. And this can stay as a pre-registration document, but it can also be transferred as a pre-registered report. So there are some journals, and there is an increasing number of journals actually accepting pre-registered reports. So these are actually articles that are written before collecting the data or before doing the experiment or before starting the study, basically. And you are going to submit this article, so explaining all the things that you are going to do, but it has really the format of an article. So there is an introduction section and the method section and expected results that are detailed. And this document is sent to reviewers that are going to like give their opinion and give feedback on your proposal of article, and you are going to like respond to the reviewers' comments. So as for like any type of article, and once the pre-registration is accepted, usually you have 1 year to do the actual study and submit the actual paper. So here, pre-registration are really a gain of time, because you have the paper that is like written in terms of introduction and method. You have feedback on your method, so before actually doing the study, which can always be nice, and you have your paper accepted before the actual start of your study, and you just have to add some elements at the end, which are actually the results and the discussion. So it's something that is really nice in terms of gain of time. And actually it also raised another question, which is what is the place of more or less external feedback in the pre-registration process? In my opinion, the pre-registered report, one of the big advantages really that you have feedback from external researchers on the written document. So like, you can do conferences for presenting your ideas or team meetings and so on to get informal feedback. Here, it's a more formalized feedback on how you really present your experiment and how you want to analyze your data and so on. So I think the pre-registered report has this advantage. And it also questioned whether like actually pre-registration should be included in a more like community type of way of thinking open science, and whether we should like accept or invite for feedbacks on pre-registrations before doing the experiment in order to, or the study, in order to like improve our own research. So there is the question, like one big question that is often raised with pre-registration is the question of flexibility. And actually, so being committed to your pre-registration allows you to avoid unconscious biases, such as confirmation bias, or like excluding participants and so on. So like different types of misconduct, but that can be actually directly linked to biases. And it helps you to think about every step before conducting the study. So these are advantages, but it can also be seen as reducing the flexibility that you have. So basically you are like committed to one analysis plan, and it's seen as not allowing for discoveries. This is not necessarily the case for two reasons. So the first one is like, it's not because you pre-registered some analysis that you cannot do conduct exploratory analysis. And this is important because it's not completely tying your hands. You can always present other type of analysis. You just have to label them as exploratory analysis or unregistered analysis. The other thing is that the data that you collected, or the material that you collected in your study, can be used as inputs for future research. So nothing prevents you for analyzing your data as pre-registered, but also conducted additional analysis that are going to be the input for future studies. And you can also conduct what we call pre-registered replication, which is what I now do in my research. So pre-registered replications is one form of pre-registration that has 3 steps. The first one is that you conduct experiments, so not pre-registered experiments, you can still pre-register some part, but the idea is really to have exploratory experiments. And you can do one experiment, or you can do several of them in order to try to understand a little bit the mechanism or the result that you get. And then once you have understood what is going on, you can commit to the findings and the methods of the exploratory experiments and pre-register a study. So the pre-registration here comes as a second step after the exploratory phase. The idea here is that when we have issues such as, actually including one demographic variable can change the result, such as age, or doing one type of test compared to the other can have an influence. Well, with this pre-registered replication, it's no longer an issue, because you look at your initial sample and your initial data, you see whether actually age is a critical variable, even if you have not thought of this a priori, and you are going to pre-register that you are going to include age in your future analysis, and then you conduct your study, which can be an exact replication or a conceptual replication of the exploratory experiments. And the idea here is that, you have the benefits of pre-registration because, you prevent different types of misconduct, and you have the idea that actually you're really committed to what you expect, but you also have the benefit and the flexibility of exploratory experiments. One thing that is important is this also works for pre-registered reports. So for instance, with a team of researchers, we published a pre-registered replication. So we first conducted an exploratory study, we analyzed the results, and then we wrote a paper introduction, methods, results, and the method and expected results for the replication. And we submitted it as a pre-registered report, and this was accepted. And so we then conducted the replication experiment and published a paper. One thing that is, for me, a big advantage of this is that you know how your participant or your materials behave in your experiment or in your study. So you know whether the participant have for psychology experiments, then we have big attention issues. We have participants who do not necessarily understand our question, or we have big biases. Well, doing these exploratory experiments, and this can act a little bit as pilot experiments, actually allows you to identify these points, and thereby you can more precisely define your exclusion criteria and your analysis in your pre-registration. The last point that I wanted to discuss is the idea of pre-registration as a gold standard. Basically, what has been developing, at least in psychology, what we see that, well, adding the adjective pre-registered is something that makes all the studies super fancy. And like it seems to add some kind of reliability and robustness to the results. However, what it seems that pre-registered do not mean that it's not biased. So for instance, it like an imperfect design can be pre-registered. And so there is like the added value that you prevent for the misconduct we, well, I presented at the beginning, but nonetheless, you can have big biases in the experiment design, and it's still pre-registered. You may have some steps that may be a bit missing. So for instance, positive and negative controls that should be included in the experiment design, and to which reviewers are super attentive when you try to publish a pre-registered report, are not necessarily disclosed in like more open type of pre-registration documents. And so here, well, basically you can have a pre-registered study, but that actually lacks some really critical features. And in particular, like what has been developing also is the idea of like pre-registration replication, a pre-registered replication of previous papers, and not only those like failing to replicate previous results. And one thing that is important, like, okay, like the pre-registration like prevents from some biases and for some issues, but not necessarily provide like the like perfect evidence. And for instance, in the case of replication, basically it can miss some crucial features of the original design and leads to the non-replication of previous result, but doesn't necessarily mean that the previous results are not true or like do not evidence an existing mechanism and so on. So here again, I had several questions that we can discuss, is like whether pre-registration is always necessary. So what I tend to do in my practice is to like use more like pre-registered replication, but we can still think like whether actually it's necessary when you have really simple and straightforward designs with like very clear samples that are defined a priori and for which you like do not exclude any participant, you like really need pre-registration. So this may be the critical condition in which like maybe registration is not necessary, but still have to think about this. And well, either any alternatives for like reaching the same goals, but maybe in a less costly way or in a more efficient way. And well, is it actually desirable to look for less constraining options for reaching their goals, or the fact that actually pre-registration is a little bit kind of a heavy process is a good thing because it forces you to engage in this deep thinking process before conducting a study? And the last thing is like, what is the real added value of registrations? We know that it can help you reach some goals, but maybe these goals can be like reached in other ways. Like we can think of like publishing the data and this analysis scripts like may be sufficient and may make registration a little bit well, super like not necessary. And can it actually help collaborative research? And I think that this may be an avenue for the future of pre-registration to really like allow for this kind of feedback and for gaining the best of the most of the scientific community. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. And so I would be super happy to discuss all these different questions.
Great, thank you, Lou. Thank you so much for that very insightful introduction to pre-registration and drawing on your own research as well. So we open now to questions from the audience. It would be helpful if you could, when you do speak, if you choose to speak, if you could just turn on your camera and then we can see who you are, and you can then go ahead with your questions. Okay. Patrick. Hi, Patrick.
Hi. Thanks very much, Lou. That's a really fascinating and very helpful talk, and particularly the issue of whether pre-registration can sit alongside exploratory research. All your references were to psychology. Psychology is a particular kind of social science with a lot of experimental and is also a very well populated social science. So there are lots of psychologists, they've been going for a long time. To some extent, the field is fairly saturated with theories and models, and there's also a huge amount of existing research that allows you to, define experiments in very precise ways. But a lot of social science is not like that. For example, a lot of social sciences dealing with new phenomena. And you've only got to look at the psychological research around, for example, digital era impacts on how people behave and think to see that that also applies in psychology, that if it's a new field, if you're also in a very changing field where people's behavior is malleable, it's evolving, it's culturally shaped, and so on, it's incredibly hard to actually accurately anticipate what factors will and will not be relevant. And the final thing that some people are already raising issues about in psychology is that particularly the trend towards, demanding pre-registration as an element for a necessary element for publication seems to discriminate rather overtly and crudely against qualitative research, much of which is not just about doing a bit of piloting and calling it an exploratory experiment, which you were mentioning. I mean, everybody's always done piloting anyway, but they just didn't report it, of course. So that would be useful to be more explicit about that. But I mean, what a lot of qualitative social scientists would say they're doing is a very much deeper kind of exploratory process, where they're trying to penetrate two very complex understandings, which perhaps psychology, experimental psychology, has tended to tell us about the understandings of people in artificial situations. Often they're artificial participants, students in a class, for example, being paid $5 to do some incredibly specific, incredibly well-controlled task. Well, the real world is not like that. The real world has got millions of people, thousands of variables, all interacting with each other, literally hundreds of potentially critical variables. And a lot of qualitative social sciences would say that this pre-registration thing is a little bit like, it's a kind of possible basis for discrimination against their approaches to the discipline. I just wondered if you'd like to comment on any of that, particularly the new thing, the things we don't know what the theory is. I've seen some books on open social science that just say, well, you can't do open social science if it's vague, if you don't know what the theory precisely is. So the new, the theory, and the qualitative, what are the implications for them?
So that's completely true. Actually, I think, for what I remember, is pre-registration comes from medicines, and actually it was the controlled trials and really like trying some intervention, and so this is why it's suitable for psychology and may be less suitable for qualitative studies. However, I had the question of qualitative studies because I had one student who wanted to conduct a qualitative study, and so we're wondering and brainstorming a little bit about whether we can do a pre-registration for this study. And what we came with is a document in which what was disclosed is the type of people that the population she was going to conduct her interviews. She was going to interview the stopping rule, that she was going to apply, and the interview like a form, or like the different question that she's going to ask. So actually these are things that like people doing qualitative studies like do all, like as you say, like they do it, actually they define the things beforehand. And I think like just having this open somewhere or like published somewhere online, not necessarily publicly, can well give like evidence that it is a registered study, and it's not like doing anything and like trying to like maybe this kind of bias that quantitative people can have, and when they see more qualitative research. So I think like there is a way to reconcile the two that can be like quite easy, basically, because it's things that are defined a priori, and I think in a way even more by people who do qualitative studies than what is done by people who do quantitative studies, in which there are like more flexibility in what they are going to do with the actual data. So so this was for the qualitative study. And for like the things we don't know, here again, I think like registration may not be adapted for everything. And actually I'm like dealing a lot with things that are a little bit like exploratory compared to what can be done classically in cognitive science. And so this way I do like this kind of registered replications. I know that when the sample is defined and fixed, what can be do is to split the sample into and say, I'm going to analyze like half of the sample, like define the results, and like pre-register this analysis for actually analyzing the second half. So there are ways to do this, but I'm not like really strongly committed in the advantage of registration for everything. I think there are some advantages, especially in cases in which misconduct is possible. And so that can help to prevent from misconduct. So sometimes like registration can be only like registering the actual sample that you are going to analyze, and that may be suitable for like a larger part of social sciences, or registering what you are going to look at, basically. But like for a lot of other situations, like it can help researchers to think about their study, but well, should not be seen as a like unique gold standard or unique criteria for saying like this is good research and this is not good research. I agree. It's like, it should not be used that way.
Just quickly on new fields, if we don't really know what's going on, what's the value of pre-registration?
No, I think like there is some part of like branding and signaling with pre-registration. Like as you say, like some journals want to only have like pre-registered studies and like apply this criteria, like not with necessarily a lot of thinking process behind this application. So it can help. Nonetheless, like it can have a value, because like if you don't know what is going on and you're going to say, okay, I'm going to look at, I don't know, I want to understand what is going on with on this type of social media, for instance, you can nonetheless say, okay, I commit to only analyze first this subsection of the social media. And this is interesting because it can still like helping to say, okay, why do I think this part of the social media is going to provide important information? And once you have done your analysis and you think that actually it's not necessarily satisfying in understanding the whole process, you can like here again do another pre-registration and think, okay, why do I think this other part will give me additional information? So I think like instead of seeing this as something that is a branding and a fancy adjective, which unfortunately is how it is used in a lot of fields, it can be used as a way to think a little bit of the study beforehand, a little bit like deeper type of analysis. But but like most of people actually do this. But I think it can particularly help when you think of studies with students, because like sometimes they like want to jump into the field and say, okay, wait a little bit and think of what you are going to analyze and why and so on. So it can have also education purpose.
Great, thank you. Patrick, you've still got your hand up. Is that for another question or is that an old hand? Great. Thank you, thanks. Anyone else, any questions?
Kundai, can I ask a question?
Yes, hello Thomas, hi.
Hello, Kundai. Thank you, Lou. That was really excellent because some of us are not all that familiar with pre-registration. So you've really brought us up to speed. And like Patrick, you know, here at the UI, we don't have psychology. There's a tiny bit of social psychology in political science and sociology. So it's nice to look at those different differences between the disciplines and subdisciplines, and that was really interesting listening to that. Thank you both very much. My question is more general. In the area of patents, in patent law, and perhaps more specifically in patent strategy by companies, especially innovative companies, there's something called a patent land grab. And in the English language, a land grab is when you try to take something, the ownership of which might be uncertain. It was first used, I think, in the American Midwest when people could go there and claim land, which was of uncertain legal status or perhaps no Western legal status, etc. So are you a little bit afraid that this pre-registration trend might lead to people, you know, issuing vague or rather broad pre-registration plans, and that this might have an impact on other people's fears about going into that area, or creating some tension between research groups working in a broad area, but where another group might say, no, we won't investigate that area because it seems that there is forthcoming research, which could take years, in that area already. So it's a mixture of kind of a land grab and perhaps creating an oversensitivity among other researchers about, you know, from a position of respect, saying, I think we better not do that because somebody else might be doing it, even though, as Patrick said, you know, the research project can really evolve in qualitative, but even in economics, in directions completely unforeseen.
Yeah, so I'm not that afraid of this because like pre-registration documents are like hardly accessible. So you really have to look for it for like accessing a pre-registration document, especially because like a lot of them are private. So I think like there is so much of the opposing pressure that is people are afraid that someone like steal their ideas, that the pre-registration are like rather private until publication. So yeah, I guess that like that could be the case, but as I see how it is organized now, so for instance, in psychology, we have this platform called Open Science Framework, in which we post our pre-registration, and it can be public or private. And actually, like a lot of them are private before publication. And when you want to look for pre-registration, it's like super hard to really know what is going on in your field. Compared to the type of information we have from conferences and like short reports, or even on social media now, in which a lot of research is broadcasted. So I think like pre-registration can contribute a little bit to this problem, but only marginally compared to the other ways of communication and the other way researchers use for broadcasting their research and their ongoing projects and so on. So I would be quite confident that it should not necessarily have this negative impact. But on the other hand, I think it cannot be, well, it should not be perceived as a kind of risky way to disclose your research project before publication, and with the idea that it can be stolen at any moment, because here again it can be private, and well, there is your names, so normally it should be fine.
Thank you. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Lou. Patrick, you've got your hand up again.
Yes, I just wanted to quickly come back to Lou on this, because one of the justifications I've seen for pre-registration, particularly in medicine, has been that an awful lot of work risks replicating something, inadvertently replicating or redoing things that have already been in some way discredited or have been proven to not be very important for the process that you're looking at. And so some people have said, well, it's vital for medical research to be pre-registered because we don't want to have large-scale waste of funding on things that have already been done and have been shown not to work. But if pre-registration documents are not public, then that rationale goes out the window, doesn't it?
Yeah, so in medicine, the pre-registration are super easily accessible. So basically, there are references on Google Scholars and search engines like this. So there is trial registration, and notably because it's medical studies. So here there is also this interest of being able to be aware of what is going on in different countries and different centers. And I agree, at least in psychology, it is not used as a way, as an information for the community of researchers. What will be the information that is extracted from the pre-registration is the article that is published. So you, even pre-registered reports are not published or accessible until the final article is online or is and the final study is actually conducted. So I think what psychologists took from pre-registration is a way to prevent potential misconduct, and not the other interest of pre-registration. So yeah, that explains maybe different structures in the field.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Lou. Any more questions? If I can just ask a really quick question, we've got a few more minutes to go, but I just wondered, you mentioned different research centres, different cultures. I was wondering whether you might have noticed any differences between, say, because your approach seems to straddle research cultures on continental Europe and Anglo-Saxon. I just wanted to find out whether you might have noticed any differences there in terms of openness towards pre-registration between sort of different cultural traditions, different research communities and research cultures.
So what I have noticed is more so there is two, for me, main factors that it can, within psychology, that can explain differences, is more the effect of age. So more senior researchers who are used to not pre-register their studies, do not necessarily are against registration, but do not have this kind of reflex of registration. And the second factor is sub-disciplines in cognitive science, in psychology and cognitive science. So those who are doing more types of modeling approaches, really well-defined type of tasks and so on, do not necessarily pre-register, while people doing more social interaction and more kind of exploratory research actually tends to pre-register more in order to provide evidence that they are not doing they are not making up the results and so on, so that they are doing real science for psychologists. So there are differences in in the different labs, in different teams, depending on these two variables mainly. But I know that there are also institutional rules on open science, so that can actually incentivize people to do pre-registration. But I think it all more applies to open data than to pre-registration still.
Great, thank you. Got a few more minutes before we close. There aren't any more questions. I just wondered, Lou, we've got quite a lot of young researchers at the webinar today. Any tips, any top tips that you can share with them, with us, on pre-registration, pre-registering their research, and especially if they're working within research communities that may not be entirely familiar with the concept of pre-registration and the benefits of it, and even the challenges?
So yeah, well, I would say that there are standard formats, and you can find online forms you just have to fill for your pre-registration, but it's not necessarily the easiest way. So if you want to start, try to deal with pre-registration to see what you can get from it, and I think it can help you to still think a little bit ahead your study. The best way is to try to define your own key variables and your own key features, saying, okay, what is important for my study, what I am defining a priori, and what I'm going to look at, and so on. And I think it's the most easy way to the easiest way to start with pre-registration, because sometimes it can be completely discouraging, the type of detail that that the kind of online document asks you for. So doing a more free, flexible way of doing pre-registration, I think is better for you, less of a waste of time, and it can help you to think a little bit of your research a little bit more, at least, or to present it to other researchers and have feedback from them.
Great, thank you so much for your insights on that. Any more questions, any thoughts, any comments? Patrick.
Sorry, Lou, I wondered if there was any literature that you would recommend for other people to read. I mean, it's either stuff that you yourself have used or things that you think would be useful.
On pre-registration specifically, well, I haven't it's more something we build as labs in terms of practices. Nonetheless, I can recommend you to look for pre-registered reports and pre-registration documents in order to see how you can adapt the format to your own research, and see what are the features that may be relevant for your research and what are those that may not be relevant, in order to have an idea of how you can apply it if you want to your own studies.
Great, thank you both. Anyone else? We've got a few seconds to go before midday here in London. Great, thank you. Oh, Anna.
Greetings. Very interesting, the topic. My question is concerning, okay, so the result invalidated. What if you do this pre-registration and you start everything, the theories are proving correct, the studies are going right, and when you start writing, for instance, for someone that's a researcher in international relations, you see the shifting tides that are happening right now. And all of a sudden things are happening. So the things that you started from, the theories you started from, have to be adapted. Can you adapt in that stage after you did the pre-registration part? Can you adapt it? Can you change? Can you switch? What do? You try to find what went wrong and explain it, or what else? What's your advice?
So, so this is a very good question. Okay, we rarely have this in psychology, so, but what is still doable with registration, that you can state what was pre-registered and how you understand the result based on your registration. And you can still conduct exploratory analysis, or you can still discuss. So basically, you never register your discussion or your interpretation of your results. So basically, you can always update this, and you can also conduct additional analysis if it's relevant for understanding the changing situations. And also, it's not because you an external event invalidates some parts of your registration that your registration have no value. So as I said, just stating which material or what kind of thing you are going to use for your study is a key feature of registration. So this can still be present. So there is always flexibility, and it's not something that you cannot deviate from. So you can either state that you are doing exploratory analysis, or you can say, okay, well, this was the registration, this was my material, and well, I'm actually updating my theory, but I'm keeping the same material, it's the same study, but I'm updating the way I'm interpreting the results, or the way I'm actually analyzing it, because, well, the situation has changed. I don't know if it's clear.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. So one thing that is important, each the different features that are registered has some intrinsic value, and so, well, depending on your situation, well, this you can decide to register one of this feature because you think that it's, well, only this that is interesting for your research, and it has nonetheless an importance for showing the reliability of the results, and also for your own thinking process when designing the study.
Great, thanks, Anna. Thanks for your response to that. And Patrick, I think we'll take that as a final one. Final comment, final question?
Yeah,
I know we're running
sorry,
over.
I was just triggered by Anna's very interesting question. Do you think pre-registration helps the publication of what you might call either negative results or sort of non-sensational, non-original finding kind of results?
So it was presented like this some years ago to psychologists, saying yeah, you're going to see it's incredible because you will be able to publish negative results, and that's going to be great, and so on. And what I see is that the only negative results I see published with registrations are sensationalist non-results. So saying okay, this thing that everybody talks about actually doesn't exist, and we conducted a registered study and it showed that it doesn't exist, with actually noting all the issue with the fact that, well, you're just concluding on one or two studies, even if they are registered. So it can be due to publication bias and so on, but still it's only one or two studies. So there is a little bit of this confusion, but in practice, at least in psychology, we don't see the explosion of the publication of non-results. Thanks to registration. What has been developed is more this websites that are hosted by university that allows for reports of null results. So I know University College London has one, so that allows researcher to have this very short reports, but that are published somewhere, and so that are accessible for meta-analysis and so on.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for that, Patrick and Lou. And on that note, thank you so much for your patience. I know we've gone just slightly over, but thank you so much to Lou. Please join me in thanking Lou for having taken the time out to speak to us about all things pre-registration. So thank you so much, Lou, for coming today. And thank you all for joining us today. We've got very exciting, very interesting lineup of future events. The next one will be on the 13th of October on Open Access Publishing. I'll be posting something on that very shortly on the various CIVICA platforms. So Lou, thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for coming. And hopefully we'll see you all again at a future event sometime soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.